with the...
This meeting is being recorded.
All right.
All right. Okay. So welcome everybody. So to this dataset quality in a multidisciplinary open data space session. It's an RDA session. I'm Carlo Cagnina, and I will chair this session. So first of all, some house rules. So please rename yourself with the first name, surname, and organization, so it's easier to recognize you. Ensure that your microphone is muted, except when asked to take the floor. And please be sure that your video is off, except when speaking. And if you'd like to ask a question, post it in the chat. You can use also the collaborative notes that are in the chat to keep writing. And when presenting, you will need to share your presentation through your own device, except exceptions. Okay. Then, first of all, just to avoid misunderstandings, when we speak about dataset quality, is not just data quality. So we are speaking about any issues with instruments, variables, measurement, collection, access through the entire life cycle of a dataset. So when we speak about dataset quality, we speak about the quality of both the input and output of the data, the quality of metadata and documentation of the software and workflows, as well as the quality of infrastructure, tools, system, procedures, processes. In these sessions, we speak about dataset quality and not just data quality. Okay, so just the agenda, so everybody can be familiar with what is going to happen the next 1 hour and a half. So after the welcoming remarks, we have a presentation about the summary of the last similar session RDA given by GPeng, and then we have 4 different use cases coming from the EOSC, European Open Science Cloud, with 5 minutes presentation each from a different discipline. And then afterwards, we have an overview of the guidelines to improve the management and accessibility of dataset quality information started from the Earth Sciences, given by Robert Duns. And then we can start a multidisciplinary discussion, which likely will lead also to setting a working group for fair dataset quality information. And so we close with remarks and next steps. Okay, so according to the agenda, now I leave the floor to GPeng, but I will share the screen. Okay, let me see.
Hi, everybody. While Carol is pulling up the presentation, and I'd just like to introduce myself quickly. I'm a senior principal research scientist at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. And today I will give a quick summary of the similar session we had last year at RDA. Maybe in presentation mode. Thank you. Focusing on the different perspective on data quality. Next, please. So the session was held on November 3rd, 2021, and the goal was to introduce the dataset quality information guidelines that we have developed for Earth Science community, and to gauge the RDA community interests towards a RDA working group, to broaden the discipline base, go beyond Earth Science. So the organizations are from various groups. They are international, and I have a list here. Some fun numbers, we had about 47 attendees, and they are international multidisciplinary experts. And about 110 registers, people who registered have added session to their agenda. To me, that show their interest, and there are over almost 1,000 views of session page. Next, please. And there are 6 invited presentations, both metadata and the data quality, and primarily focusing on challenges and the best practice in various disciplines. Next, please. In the next 6 slides, I would give some high-level key points from each presentation. And this particular one is by Dr. Rahindam on the genomic data and associated health data. And one of the key points was that genomic data are highly identifiable. And they are challenges because for data sharing, because they can be related to regulatory and technical and social. So they are kind of unique to the health genomic and health data. And she has also touched on that there are more and more complex data are being generated, and point out that stewardship framework needs to be at the level of data repository and the stakeholders. Those 2 points are fairly similar to what we have seen in earth science. Next, please. And the Dr. Genova talked about the data quality astrology, and she has indicated that the astronomical data are routinely shared, and they are international agreed metadata. So they seems to be fairly coordinated for sharing. And she also indicated that the trust in the data providers rely on quality data metadata and the data sharing ecosystem. And that's what the guidelines from earth science trying to promote. She has also indicated that quality is ensured by the integrated team of domain scientists, data stores, and IT engineer. And that's what I can relate it to, and be promoting such integrated team. Next, please. So Dr. McKenzie talked about the metadata quality, data quality in the social science, and he has touched on the distinct contrast between official, statistical, and research data, as some are listed here. And also he has indicated that national, international collections are highly integrated and quality controlled. And they are doing so to ensure that comparison, temporal comparison and international comparison. And one of the promising thing he has indicated that the quality assessment of metadata automation is emerging. Next, please. And the Dr. Bob Dunn has provided a presentation on the guidelines, and as he will also provide one in this session. And some of the key points from his presentation are, as Carlo has indicated, dataset quality includes data quality, but it's more than data quality. He has touched on that dataset reuse. It's dependent on dataset quality information. And there are many contributors to data quality information generations. And he touched on development process and provide a background on why the guidelines is needed and how it was approach was done, and indicate the next step is to improve the quality guidelines for sharing dataset quality information within and across discipline. And I think he will probably talk about more in his presentation in this session. Next, please. Dr. Kristen Hansen has provided a summary on the surveys they have done on the data quality in environmental science, and including point out the gaps between data producers and data consumers, so that indicate that sometimes the quality information provided may not be necessarily the data quality information needed by user. And she has touched on some of the things, including the fact the high effort is really needed for data consumer to come up the data quality, and they're hard to compare. And also point out that quality information is not provided. Two main reasons are interests of the consumers are not known, and also lack of well-known and well-used centers. So efforts we've been trying to do here, and hopefully going forward with RDA community, is to provide that well-established standards for community to utilize. Next, please. And the last presentation is by Dr. Ivana Ivanova, and talk about the development of geospatial data quality use cases. And she has touched on why the effort, and what was the effort, and how they're trying to do, try to collect the use cases. And if anybody is interested, contact her directly, or you can contact Carlos and me as well if you have interest in providing use case. Next, please. And we also had a discussion session that very interesting and productive discussion, and we asked a number of the questions, and I have some samples for this particular one. What's your community, and what brought you to this bird of feather session? And this is some of the examples to indicate the disciplines and why they come, and that kind of goes to my next key takeaways. Next, please. Each discipline is unique, but many are facing very similar needs and the challenges from the presentations and the discussion we had, and they are strong interests. There's strong interest in learning and sharing knowledge and the best practice cross discipline. So it's a effort. RDA community will be a good venue for this to be exchanged. And they also from the session is that the RDA community is interested in moving forward. We have planned on initiating a RDA working group. Unfortunately, the effort had to put on hold because we couldn't get the organizational support for both US and Australia co-chairs, which we had it now. And we also need, so we're hoping to get started again after this session. And we still need more co-chairs if you're interested in, especially we would like to get one EU co-chair and preferable from a non-geospatial discipline. Next, please. And I have listed email here if you're interested in participating or contributing in any way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jipeng, for having given the overview of what happened in the last RDA session. Similar goals also for this session. And as you see we have similar challenges across different disciplines that could then be integrated in more complete guidelines. So now we can see the challenges in our disciplines moving to different case studies. And to this end, we have from the European Open Science Cloud, where I co-lead the the advisory group named Task Force in Data Quality. We identified 4 different case studies, and with this we can start with Chris Schubert, who will give a presentation from his side. Are you able, Chris, to share your screen?
Yeah, I will do. Perfect. So I hope you can see it, and I want to talk. So first of all, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. So I want to talk a little bit for the next 5 minutes about data quality in the framework of an legal regulation and in the European Union. It's one example, the Inspire Directive. And I want to show you the lessons learned here to set up a data quality process. So Inspire is a directive to establish the infrastructure for spatial information, and it's operated by a data provider and EU member states itself. When it started, Inspire was a kind of early enabler to provide geospatial information. And the target group as data providers here, the public sector or the public authorities here. So the Inspire Directive addresses 34 spatial data themes, like land use, land cover, geology, soil, natural risk zones, etc. And the legal framework came into force in 2007. And it shows here also different stages of implementation and steps for evolution. Here I will come later back to the time frame here. The important thing and why it was important here to take this discussion also into the European Open Science Cloud Task Force on data quality was here that we have an example based on a legal framework. It means there's an obligation what member states and data provider have to implement. There's also a technical framework with recommendations, in the end recommendations, but more or less technical guidelines or technical guidance documents, which describe how to implement the Inspire requirements. We have also some documents about generic conceptual models, how to model data, how to set up a controlled vocabulary, and so on. And Inspire itself, it's not a standardization body. Inspire is more or less a kind of collection of existing standards, mainly based on ISO, the 1900 group, and OGC standards. And in each of the 34 Inspire themes, we have a collection. It's called here normative reference, similar to the ISO setup, where we have a collection of standards which are applied here for one specific theme, and in the annex it's also similar to the ISO construct, is also that we have an abstract test suite, a kind of theoretical list what the data provider has to do to achieve conformance. And the GRC developed, the European Commission or the Joint Research Center developed a web-based validator here, and it's it's called the executable test suite. The links are here via GitHub. To have a kind of semi-automatic validation process. The European Commission provides a lot of tools like the Inspire Validator, the Registry for the controlled vocabulary, the Geoportal, and so on. And in this draft here, I put it from the European Commission. So this is just a process how to works and how the monitoring is running. In the end, the member states or data providers provide information, and via the publishing process, the Inspire Validator and also the Geoportal are calculating indicators. And they are checking on one example, if you are using controlled vocabulary, if you are using the correct data encoding or feature type class, and so on. And in the end, you get the kind of monitoring display here, where you can see the results of the ranking. One aspect or specific aspect I want to show you is the Inspire Registry. This is an European vocabulary tool as a kind of first step to achieve or overcome the semantic aspect on the different data models here. So quite important for me is, and I think it's also quite unique for vocabulary server, that we applied here the ISO 19135 and especially for the process how to register some items here. This registry is multilingual and it's an open source software, and different data providers, member states, and so on are able or provided or implemented this. And of course, we have also in this community different discussion about registry systems, federated system, what is the common data model behind, and so on. But for me, a quite important or nice publication, and well formed is this from Simon Cox, the publication from last year. It's about the fair vocabulary and how to make it fair. So in the end, the conclusion here, it's the implementation of quality monitoring. It's a kind of marathon. So Inspire takes more than 5 years, really to set up concepts and a kind of monitoring system as a kind of technical readiness here. Of course, the Inspire is, I think it's also, or I would say it's a closed domain. So because it's a limited, has a limitation. There's a limited number of common data models or schemas. So it's the domain is in the ISO or TC 211 in the geoscience or geoinformatic domain. A positive thing, of course, a legal framework can or is able to push the time frame and the milestones and the obligations, of course. Plus is also multilinguality here. legal framework gives also a kind of idea who or what is the governance of the implementation. A disadvantage here, of course, within a legal framework is that it's quite static, and it needs a huge effort really to create any changes and adaptation here. So yeah, but and with this I want to end and thank you, and yeah, hope for any fruitful discussion afterwards. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Been a very extensive review, and I see already in the chat some questions, so we can deal with the questions afterwards in the multidisciplinary discussion time.
Yeah.
Now we move to the next case study given by Andrea Bertino. I share the screen on his behalf. Let's see if I manage.
Thank you, Carlo. I'm sorry that I cannot share my video and my screen, but thank you for supporting me in sharing. So.
If you see, do you see correctly?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So I was asked to give another example of how data quality can have an impact on other disciplines. So it's a very simple example from my previous experience in the digital humanities. So you can go to the next slide that go a couple of information about the context of my work activity. So I said I have some experience in digital humanities. My background is actually in philosophy, but at the moment I am senior project manager for open science and research data at Switch. Switch is a Swiss foundation that supports Swiss universities with various IT services and different kind of infrastructural support. So, and Switch is a member of the EOSC2, of the European Open Science Cloud, and as such, we participate in some EOSC task forces like this one on fair data, on the data quality and fair matrix with Carlo and the other European colleagues. So, and the use case I'm presenting today relates to the topic of document digitization. So actually, this is not a traditional field of activity of Switch. However, Switch is working with some institution to create a new digitization center. So I can imagine that in the future, this use case may be of big relevance for us as well. So yeah, we can go to this slide exactly. And I will give now an example from different disciplines, as say, from digitization topic. This example is based on a so-called scholarly primitives. It has a very basic activity such as reading, writing, annotating, and this is digitizing a text in order to better examine, to better analyze and study this text also with the digital techniques. Yeah? You know that for scholar in humanities, sometimes it's even difficult to understand text as data, but however, you have the problem to discuss about the quality of this text as data set. Above all, when you have, after an optical character recognition process, you have a digitalized test, and you need to know something about the quality of this text in order to rely on the scientific result of different kind of application that make use of this text. So we can go to the next slide that gives some input about some information about the problem. So the context of the problems in cultural heritage institution, above all, there is this use challenge, yeah, when we try to ensure the data quality of digital collection. And in order to establish the desired level of data quality, an institution needs to understand which data quality criteria matter the most. So you see, and how to develop meaningful metrics and how to measure the impact of increased quality. So, but the problem is that most archives provide at best very generic information about the data quality of the digitalized collection. And And of course, humanities scholars use the growing numbers of documents available in digital archives, but especially for all documents that are the result of OCR processing, there is not perfection. Yeah, they are not error-free, and scholars need to assess whether the trends that they find in the data represent real phenomena or they result from tool-induced bias. It's the tool or it's the quality of the text. And it's unclear to what extent current tools support this assessment task. Yeah. And when working with digital archives, scholars perceive the data quality of digitized documents to be very low. So knowing that the same data uses as a basis for retrieval system, the scholar raises question about the trustworthiness of results that can be obtained from search function, and they ask about the possibility to use this test for scientific publication. Yeah. So we can go to the next slide just to focus a little bit more specifically what happens if we don't have information about data quality. So the problem is that data custodian cannot make sure that the level of quality of the data, the infrastructure they provide, is sufficient to support the research tasks of the users. And if we don't have enough information available, it's impossible to understand and to reuse, even just quoting the product that is realized on the basis of this text. So it looked like these issues will not be solved simply by improving the digitization infrastructure, but it requires also, how can I say, a better understanding of the impact of data quality on user tasks. So it's not just a technical problem, but also a problem of awareness. Yeah. And then is the question, how can scholars be supported in assessing the data quality for the specific research tasks? To correct errors in data, human input is in many cases still indispensable, is the point. However, so humanities scholars need to be able to assess how data quality and inherent bias within tools influence their researcher tasks. So therefore, they need specific information on the data quality of the sub-collection used and the biases the tools provided may have introduced into the analysis. So in the last slide, it's just a couple of open questions that you can take as input to our discussion. So some questions concern the context of this problem, the causes, who is responsible for checking the quality of digitized text, the person who performed the digitalization, the researcher who uses it. This is not so clear in many contexts. Then for the document that are published, so you can't just rely on the prestige of the publisher. This is also a huge problem in the open access discussion about the tendency in humanities to rely on very well-established publisher, even if their publishing models are always not so fair, but it's another topic. However, this played a role here too, just as a way to give a kind of indirect certification of the quality of the digitization. But then what about unpublished archival resource? The main problem is there. Yeah? You have a lot of material that you need for research, but you cannot certify the quality. And above all, that process of digitalization that are done in a collaborative way. Yeah? There are digitalization projects where many people from all the world cooperate in the digitalization process. And then other question that we can focus in our discussion concern this possible solution. So just to identify which tools are able to verify the reliability of a digital edition. And then we can discuss about the standards that you could develop to define the quality of a digitized test. And then, of course, the discussion about who should define the standards. Are the researchers themselves, or the something different, so some kind of institution that have an overview on all the different disciplines and all the different needs of the different scientific communities. Yeah. It's just some kind of open question. I hope that this can contribute to our discussion. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for the review from your use case. I remind everybody there are collaborative notes where we can always take into consideration for putting your questions or to add your names at least as a participant and so on. You find the link in the chat. Now we move to the other case study, which is given by Sarah Streike. Sorry. And Sarah, do you manage to share your screen?
Yes, I think you should be able to see my screen, and now hopefully also slides in presentation mode.
Yes.
Yes, great. Yeah, thanks a lot for the introduction. So my name is Sarah Striek, and I'm in Austria working at Graz University of Technology. And I would like to also present now a technical topic, and I think there are also some quite similar questions there compared to what Andrea just presented. So the title of my short presentation is Data Quality to Ensure Unbiased AI Algorithms. And so this is actually a topic that is also quite important for the European Commission. So there is more and more artificial intelligence used in different domains, in different application scenarios. But artificial intelligence is sometimes kind of a black box, so it's quite hard to understand what happens in the background if you're not the developer of the AI tool. And this is also why the European Commission said we need to work on trustworthy AI. So we need to work on aspects like accountability, human agency and oversight, technical robustness and safety, privacy and data governance, transparency, diversity, non-discrimination, fairness, societal and environmental well-being. So those are topics that you should consider when you're using artificial intelligence. And one actually quite important aspect when using artificial intelligence is the underlying data. So you have on the one hand the algorithm that does something for you and that helps you to answer your question, but usually this algorithm or this model needs to be trained beforehand. So you need to have a large amount of data to train your algorithm, to enable the algorithm also to help you then in decision making and to provide a decision support. And this is also why it makes it so important that also the underlying training data has high quality, or at least that you somehow take into account different factors, or that you try to also ensure a good quality of the data that you're using when training your algorithm, to really ensure that the output that you get then from your algorithm is really trustworthy and is without biases. So, and actually these are, I mean, we already heard that there are a lot of different aspects on data quality. And what we are usually talking about when we speak of data quality in the context of AI is fairness and bias-free data. So there are actually two different concepts of fairness. So there is on the one hand the group fairness. So this is something where you can think of male and female groups. So this is something where we usually say, yeah, the group of males should be treated similar to the group of female. But on the other hand, there is also the concept of individual fairness. So this is something that also our legal system tries to define. So our legal system says that each person should be treated the same way. Doesn't matter of any sex or any other discriminatory factor. But this is also quite contradictory. So actually there are those two concepts that somehow fit to each other, but on the other hand, they don't fit to each other, because if there's a larger group of male or female, then also the individual fairness is distributed differently. And this is also why this makes it such a complex topic. And this is also why when talking about data quality in AI, this is really something where people struggle with. And what they are doing now is they are trying to develop metrics to really make this fairness measurable. So yeah, in the bottom of the slide, you can see different types of fairness metrics that are developed. And I just want to briefly point out two of them, which is the average odd difference and the statistical parity difference. But as you can see, there are also many others. And this is something yeah, where there's no true or wrong, there is also something where you have to individually assess which metrics is the one that you should choose for your application. So here you can see the two different metrics. So there is on the one hand the equality in outcome approach and the equality in quality approach. So statistical parity difference and average odd difference. And the first one actually assumes that there is no difference between the groups, even if there is a difference in the data. So you can see that the number of privileged class, so classified as 1, minus the number of underprivileged classified as 1. So this means that the outcome should be actually the same, but this is really focused on this group level. And the equality in quality approach assumes actually that the outcome really accurately reflects the reality, ensuring that there is no bias introduced by the AI algorithm. So again, here also those metrics, they are somehow contradictory, and it's really important to see what way you apply which of those metrics. And this actually already leads me somehow to sum up or to complete up this topic. So actually there is not a single concept of fairness when talking about data quality in AI. So sometimes those definitions really contradict each other. And setting these boundaries is not non-trivial, and it's ambiguous. So it's really something where you need to take into account your specific application and your specific domain, and then you have to decide what's the way to go for you in order to ensure that the training data that you're using is bias-free and that you're developing an AI algorithm that really is fair and takes fair decisions. And on top of that, everything also is tightly coupled with ethical considerations and worldviews, such as religion, culture, region, and yeah, this is something where you really have to, also have to see how fairness is in a specific region or in a specific context defined. And what people are doing now or trying to do in order to solve this is some groups try to develop reliable semi-automatic tools. So tools that really automatically compute and visualize fairness and bias metrics. But as you already saw, I mean, there are different methods on how to assess fairness and how to define those metrics. So even if the tools are then semi-automated, you might have several ways of defining your metrics, and then again you have to choose which one is the correct one for your application. And this is also why it's very important to develop these clear guidelines for certifying fairness of AI applications, also taking into account international standards. And what is also very important to get a better understanding of the topic is to define case studies that can also serve as a reference for a certification or for a quality assessment of your data set. And in the end, I just wanted to point out that we in Austria, so as I mentioned, I'm at Graz University of Technology, and we have there a competence center, which is called the KNOW Center. And we are trying to develop such case studies together with different stakeholders. And we also have somehow a special emphasis on industry, because in industry, more and more artificial intelligence applications are being used. And what we are trying to do is we want to have a holistic view on the artificial intelligence, so taking into account algorithm, ethics, law processes, cybersecurity, but also the data. And yeah, there are different companies that are really interested also in assessing yeah, fairness of their data sets and biases within their data set. So this is a yeah, quite interesting topic for us. And yeah, I'm looking forward to a discussion with you on that topic. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks for the overview. So now there should be an additional case study from the bioimage, but unfortunately, Oliver Biermeier from Switzerland could not join us. So we just waiting for him. We moved to Bob Downs, who, let's see if he can manage to share the screen.
Okay.
Bob?
Yes. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay. And are my screen screen visible now?
Perfect.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. So, yes, I'm going to give you the overview of the international community guidelines that were developed to improve Earth science data set quality information. And let's see if this moves. Yes, it seems to be working. And so we talked about this a little bit earlier, but when we talk about a data set, it's a collection of data, differentiating it from data itself. It's an identifiable collection, and this has the potential to be curated by a single individual or actor. And so data set quality information is information about the quality of that data set, including its metadata, documentation, software, etc. And so when we look at the usability of data set quality information, we can ask ourselves a lot of questions. Has the quality of the data set been assessed? And how would we know? Is the quality of the data set described? When you get the information that it has been assessed, one would hope that there's some information telling you about the quality of the data set that results from that assessment. And do users understand the data set quality information? And this is particularly important if we're talking about a data set that's being used across disciplines. So, each discipline or set of users might have their own knowledge base. And then does the data quality information help determine the data set usefulness? And of course, this is dependent upon the context of the planned use. And then based on the data quality information, is the data set suitable for my individual usage? As we've been talking about FAIR, the data set quality information guidelines were developed to look at the FAIR aspects of data set quality. So looking at data set quality from the perspective of FAIR, we could ask, is the data set quality information discoverable with the data? And is it accessible and sufficiently described in the available information? And in terms of interoperability, is the data set quality information understandable? And then in terms of reusability, are the rights described for using the data set quality information? So I'm going to give you just a very brief overview of each of the guidelines in the data set quality guidelines. And so the first one is the simplest, and it's just to describe the data set with a comprehensive landing page. And that description should include, the title, persistent, and identifier, which could be a digital object identifier, the DOI, as the persistent identifier. And then it could also be a uniform resource indicator, but you want to have the version of data producers, etc., as well as the usage license, so that people know, in fact, that they can use the data and the quality information. The details of the quality guidelines are part of guideline 2, and that is to actually use a metric, a quality assessment metric. And this should be one that is published, publicly available, and that has a globally unique persistent identifier so that people can access it. So when you're referring to the quality assessment metric, people are able to access that and refer to it as needed. And ideally, it should be available, through some kind of a public repository, such as those you mentioned there, and it should be retrievable by the identifier. That is, the identifier should resolve to like a HTTPS or some other known protocol. And looking at guideline 3, it's to capture the quality attribute aspects in the assessment method and results in a data set level metadata record using some consistent framework. That is, you should have a metadata record that's just about that one data set that contains the quality information. And that schema, the metadata schema that you're using for the quality assessment framework should be semantically and structurally consistent and follow some standard. Ideally, it's a national or international metadata standard, and it should include the description of the quality attributes to be assessed and a description of the assessment method that was used and a description of the assessment results, as well as any versioning and history of that that's relevant to that data quality information. Then looking at Dataset Quality Guideline 4, it's to describe comprehensively the assessment method, the workflow and results in at least a human readable quality report. So this should follow some kind of a template that is published and has an open license, so anybody can access and use that template, and it links back to the persistent identifier to the dataset level metadata record. And then finally, the last guideline is to report and disseminate the dataset quality information in an organized way. So this should be available via web interface with a comprehensive description. So there we're following guideline 1 and having an assessed quality attribute or aspect or dimensions available. The evaluation method in the process should be visible, viewable, and how to understand and use this information. So this should be done in a manner that is easily understood, and that gets back to this whole concept of using things because of the knowledge bases of the disciplines that might want to use the data set. So when we think about the quality information in context, it should be for a specific purpose. That is, individuals might have different purposes in mind when they're going to look at the data for their own use. And so the quality information measures may be only appropriate for some users, but it should be clear the applicability of the data. And since some measures may be more applicable to some than others, that should be made clear as well. And that may be dependent upon how that information is represented. So making the information as clearly understood as possible can help interdisciplinary use of the data. Challenges for data quality, though, are assessing the data quality for multiple uses and users. if you're reviewing the data, you're looking at the data from your own perspective. And so supporting multiple uses or different types of uses than your own may be a challenge, and representing that data quality for such uses also may be a challenge. So in terms of next steps, I would recommend that we deploy the guidelines across disciplines and test those uses. And so that we can see and get recommendations for improvement from different disciplines, so that the guidelines would be helpful for being used within diverse disciplines. And then in terms of being able to discuss these further, certainly the first recommendation is to create an RDA working group to look specifically at the fair data set quality information and how it might be improved. But also there are groups in Australia, North America, and Europe. And so in Australia, there's the Australian-New Zealand Data Quality Interest Group. And in North America, there's the ESIP Information Quality Cluster. And that's pretty much going international now. It's got an Australian contingent at least. And then the European Open Science Cloud Fair Metrics and Data Quality Working Group. And so thank you very much for that, for your attention, and I'll turn it back to Carlo.
Great. Thanks for the review about the guidelines. And I would like to thank you all the presenters, especially the ones from Europe, because the time zone might not be the most appealing. And now we slowly move to the session where we start a multidisciplinary discussion. And to this extent, I prepared just a few questions that might help to steer a bit the conversation. You might see those in the screen. Just to explain briefly what is the full bunch of words here. The only figure you see is it comes from the OSCE European Open Science Cloud survey that has been released a few months ago. And in this picture, which is a word cloud, it shows which is the answer from the respondents to the question on which is the biggest concern or barrier to follow dataset quality standards. And you see time consuming, inexperience, complexity is calls to a question that has popped out in the chat while Chris was speaking about the INSPIRE directive. So Francois Genova has made a question related to the complexity of the standard. So maybe Francois, would you like to take the floor to elaborate better this question?
Yes, it's just that I hear about INSPIRE a lot. I am an astronomer, so I am not in that domain, but I hear a lot about INSPIRE, and I have a feeling that very often, except when this is a big space agency, people are inspired by INSPIRE. So I am not completely sure that they implement fully INSPIRE, but I think it was said at the end of the talk that INSPIRE has pushed towards thinking about the subject and doing things along to improve the situation, but I am not completely sure that INSPIRE is fully implemented in all cases. It could be possibly useful because of its complexity. But that's all. I mean, it was just a question to the presenter to check that my feeling is true or not, or partly true.
Okay, great. Thanks for elaborating the question. Maybe, Chris, do you have any immediate reaction?
Yeah. I can do, and Francois, I think you are right. for this kind of rough perspective. So Inspire is quite complex. So I mentioned there are 34 thematic areas here, and with these thematic areas, we have also a kind of a number, and it's, as I remember, so we have 76 application schemas, thematical application schemas, plus also conceptual basic model or basic schemes. So in person of me, I'm lucky because I was responsible at the European Commission to merge all the data models together. But honestly, this is a kind of privilege to be one of the person, and I would say so 5%, they really understand the complexity of just for data modeling. Yeah.
So I think, yes, sorry, go on.
No, and so, and this aspect is so, or it's also kind of a barrier here. So so Inspire Inspire knows about the complexity and tries to in their evolution, or the European Commission really tries to make it simple and simplify this complexity.
It's just lessons learned, you know. My point is more starting from that. This was top down, fully top down, I think, with the space agencies, if I remember, and so on at the beginning. Space agencies are okay as stakeholders, but they are very well organized compared to many other places. And I have a feeling that it's lessons learned about the guidance we can give, basically. So just to make sure that the guidance is applicable by most of the people.
Mm.
Simply because of the working group, I am thinking about the RDA group. I really think I also wrote in the chat that if there are activities on the subject in different regions, this is a very, very strong point to have an RDA group so that people have a place to meet. And it could be a starting point for the group that people meet. It's a place where people who work on that all around the globe are meeting. But I really think that having, with a community point of view, think about having applicable guidance is really a core aspect.
One comment would be allowed for me. So the governance of Inspire is on the European Commission side, but the development of the content is an effort, or was a task by expert groups, and it's not only a top-down process. So the issue here in general, it's in my opinion, personal opinion, is that the maturity of the data models is depends on the experiences in implementation, I would say. Yeah. Some data models are fine if I have a look on the geology. Yeah, there we have a really good implementation, but in some cases, or in some fields, the data models are not really quite mature. But in the end, it's a result of technical working groups. So it's not only a top-down approach.
Yes, and insisting on the community approach is really important in the context where we are. I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I see there is a lot of discussion going on around the Inspire. I remember also that there is a tool, a software tool that simplifies the checking of whether a dataset is Inspire compliant. So it's a way to reduce some of the complexity of the standard norms itself. I take the good point from Francois that indeed there are different groups all around the world that are speaking about quality and possibly there are many overlaps. So it's potentially a good moment for an RDA working group. And indeed, from the last session led by Jipeng was also an outcome that might be the time to move further. One of the main open points is that we, at the moment, we lack a chair from not Earth Sciences, but in Europe. And so whoever would like then to consider to join this working group that we are going to set up, please. I see a rise up, hand up, sorry.
No, I was just willing to have a preliminary question. If you want, with the RDA point of view, if you want to create a working group, you need to have deliverables in mind on a short time scale. And I am not completely sure that it's what will happen, but you know better. The people who are around the table today know better about it. Otherwise, it's an interest group, but I have a feeling that, for instance, Bob would like to have the guidance, because they developed guidance for the geospatial community. It can be, it can help to develop guidance more generally in a given time frame, but it's different from having people meeting to discuss what they are doing and to try to align to share what they are doing. So I have a feeling that putting people in the same room goes rather towards an interest group, and trying to build guidelines with a schedule is rather a working group. But it doesn't help, because if you lack chairs, having two groups does not help at all. So I am sorry.
Right, that's a good point. Yes, I'd say that for being the deliverable, being a characterization of the working group, we might have more a focus outcome that could be to make the quality information fair. While for the interested group, in case we can also go for interested group, there is much more to explore about the different aspects in quality. Some of the points are also in the slide, basically, that are those input coming out of when you explore quality. One input that was given actually by Andrea in one of the questions was about prestige. He calls it prestige, but it's about what I would call it perceived quality, which is what affects when we consider a document, in his case, or a data set coming from a particular authority, that based on what the authority comes from, or the name of the authority, the brand name, we have a different perception about the expected quality. And this is an aspect that we do not consider often, because we always or often consider anything about quality that can be curated directly by the dataset stewards, but there is much more in quality, which is perceived quality. It can be interested for an interested group itself. Maybe Andrea, would you like to elaborate more about this prestige concept?
Yes, so I think prestige is a complicated issue, just because it's not so, how can I say, it's not so rational, or better say it is not so something that you can so quantify in a precise way. So prestige has to do sometimes with tradition, has to do with some kind of symbolic capital. So, and the question could be for us, maybe the question about authority. So what is an authority in a specific field, in a specific domain, and how you can define criteria to distinguish an authority, so a person or an institution that can certify just with this status the quality of some digital object, of some digital product. I think it's a complicated question, because I say you cannot so immediately quantify prestige and symbolic capital, but it would be important to have discussions about it, because otherwise the risk is that researchers tend to use the traditional way to certify quality in specific domains, and these are not necessarily the most fair, I suppose. So, you know, in publishing, you have this oligopolistic problem, but I think with data is something similar. So if you have international recognized database that you use and you rely on them just because they come from a specific publisher, and this can be a problem for other venues, for other database publisher, curator that are not so established, but that whoever could be able to assure this quality. So I think you need some kind of generic criteria to define an authority beyond tradition, beyond prestige. So, but I cannot say much more about it. So, but maybe someone else in the group can contribute to this point.
There is a hand up by Jipeng.
Yeah, I like to go back to the point Francis has made, that for the working group, there's outcome required for fixed time frame. Usually it's like 18 months. So the scope needs to be well defined compared to interest group, which doesn't really have fixed deadlines that can be utilized to spun off working groups or task forces with the fixed goal to be addressed or fixed issues to be addressed. So for the working group, if we were to request one, we will need to have well-defined scope that's accomplishable and the useful for RDA community for, let's say, 12, 18 months.
So then the question is to target the working group to within those 18 months, which needs deliverables. Do we want to focus on making data quality information fair as the real target of this working group? Yipeng?
Oh, sorry. I saw you. That's the question for everybody. From
Yes.
my perspective, I think it's good to leverage what we have done for the dataset quality information guidelines, and that tend to be high level and to extend to other disciplines, because the RDA is really a community cross disciplines, and to say if anything needs to be refined or modified. So we have something that's already developed, we can polish it to fit the purpose of the RDA community. And for the other aspect, let's say if we want to do data quality, and then there are question of what are the quality attributes, and that different discipline may have a different attributes that's important for them. I think that's important, but I'm a little concerned about whether that is we are sure to be able to accomplish in 18 months. So we have a low-hanging fruit that we can work with the RDA community, or we can tackle something that's more practical. So either one, it will be useful. It's just a matter of how much we think we can achieve given the time limit and how useful it is to the RDA community.
Right, seems reasonable, and looks like also that the needs in the other disciplines go in a similar direction, how to attach best the quality information to make to give contextualization, so usability, boost usability of the data sets. So probably this how to make fair this quality information is probably a low-hanging fruit that we could take up. Not sure whether there are other ones from other disciplines who would like to share their own perspective on this. That probably a working group could be really a way to target the fairness of quality information. Okay, there is Bob. Yes.
Yeah, yes, thank you very much, Carlo. Yeah, I just wanted to say that regarding Peng's point about reviewing the guidelines, if the working group decided to go in that direction, this also would be an opportunity to vet the guidelines, not only to find ways of improving them, but to actually get community consensus. We had a discussion that Francois brought up, for example, about the bottom-up approach versus the top-down. And even though the guidelines have been a bottom-up approach, they haven't been bottom-up from all disciplines. And so this would be an opportunity to get many disciplines to vet the guidelines, as well as offering suggestions for improvement, and therefore to get a community consensus. Thanks.
Yes, vetting the guidelines is also a good point, because actually we built it from the earth science perspective, and it's possibly that we are biased from our own perspective, and we need to build consensus. So true, could be a good moment to start over. And for a working group, do we, maybe JPEG knows best, do we know a potential timeline to start in case we go for a working group?
The RDA has a defined process for requesting RDA working group, and that would be a good way to start. We will make the request, and then the process will be including to draft a case statement, and that statement will be reviewed by the board member and put out for the community review. And once we get we addressed comments and suggestions from the board member, I think Francisco and others might be more familiar with this process. Please let me know if I'm missing anything. And once that community review period is closed, and I think the board member would discuss it again, then they will give decision whether some up, some down. If the working group is approved, and we will have a fixed time, and either 12 to 18 months. We probably would propose for 18 months, just because most of us are, taking this on a voluntary basis, and then the moving forward with the outcomes.
François?
Yes, I would like to go back to the interest group. I have nothing to add to what Gepang was saying. I would like to come back to the idea of a place for the different ongoing initiatives on the subject can meet. And the next, there is no place fully organized by the RDA to have a meeting in the coming months, my understanding, but I think it would be possible to organize an RDA webinar where there is a status report about what is going on in the different regions about the subject. And I think it would be extremely useful to have this. Just to inform the community, I think there are many people potentially interested in the subject in the RDA. So it would be very useful to have at some point a webinar explaining what is going on in the different regions to a wider audience in the RDA community.
I think that's
Right.
a great idea. So if we were interested in have a webinar, what will be the process to work with RDA?
I would suggest that you talk to the Secretariat about it, since it's a very international endeavor to put different groups from different regions together in the same room. I think that the Secretariat would agree to do to help. But this has to be organized by the people from the different groups, of course, just to make sure that it's fruitful and it enables sharing of information and so on. But the logistics can probably be organized by the RDA. So you have to talk to the Secretariat, insisting on the international, global aspect.
All right.
Yeah,
Okay, so we will see how to move further. So probably we best leverage such a workshop also to understand where to move further. And well, okay. So for it's almost, well, it's actually 6, and not sure whether we have a few little minutes left because we started later. But you might see that there are many different topics in quality which are not only related to how to share this information. The slide itself shows that there are many components that we are actually discussing within EOSC, the European Open Science Cloud, to create a common ground understanding across disciplines. And probably an interest group could also be an interesting room for discussing those. Well, if nobody wants to add anything else at the moment, okay, please.
Carol, can I ask you a quick question?
Yes.
Okay. How long the working group will be, for 2 years, or I'm talking about the working group you are co-chair?
So this working group in EOSC will end in December 2023.
Okay, thank you.
So the first outcomes will be published for the communities. So they are just a draft so that the community can give input. So we can consolidate in a later stage. So the first draft will be published in December of this year. And let's see it from there, how far we can go. Well, okay. Then I'd like first to thank all the presenters that made a great effort for being available and for putting together inputs from different disciplines. And I'd like to thank the participants who made the discussion lively. And we are moving towards making a working group and an interest group. We still have to decide this. And finally, I'd like to thank RDA for organizing and the International Data Week. And for quality, we will continue to speak about quality in the next code data meeting, which will be on Thursday, similar time. Okay, let's see if there is nobody else who wants to add anything. consider that there are the collaborative notes where you can keep writing your thoughts, and I put on the chat again the link of the collaborative notes. So also after this this session, you can continue to type your thoughts on it, and we can keep collaborating. So for the moment, I'd like to thank you everybody for this wonderful session, and we keep going. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.